Welcome back to Citizen Earned. This video is the second video in the Second Amendment playlist following from episode 4 in the Foundation playlist. The Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A more highly contested and debated amendment I don't think we have. It seems that these are some of the most contentious words in our country. Now, in episode 2 of the Foundation playlist, I mentioned my oath to protect the nation from all enemies, foreign, which is outside of the U.S., and domestic, which is inside of the U.S. Link down below. Many people have many different opinions about what the Second Amendment means, and different sides like to each push their own narrative. Well, since I gave an oath, I should probably figure out how to do this stuff. This is what led to the entire discussion on the Foundation playlist, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, leading to the Citizen's Task. Here I am trying to figure out what the Second Amendment is all about and whether it applies to my oath of allegiance. So, in my research, I found a report from 1986 titled The Right to Keep and Bear Arms, which was a Senate report of ATF abuse, which led to the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986, also known as FOPA. In this report, I found the best, most concise summary of what the Founding Fathers meant when they wrote the Second Amendment. Their report and the history that it provides on the Founding Fathers' argument for the Second Amendment traces it back, traces its roots, its history, or the ideas that led to it, back almost 1,000 years to Britannia, before it was Britain, before it was the United Kingdom. It came out of the way that the kings lived in the Dark Ages. Through this history, they seem to have made it clear that there are two reasons for citizens to keep and bear arms. Reason one, the historical reason, is to crowdsource the expense of national defense. And you're going, what? One moment. See, war is expensive. The English kings knew this, and they only had so much money. So, if it was time to make war, they would issue an edict saying that all peasants have to arm themselves and be ready to fight the enemy, whoever that might be, with pitchforks, clubs, maybe swords. I mean, it was cheaper to tell the peasants to go find their own swords than to make swords for them to give them to go fight with them. So the peasants would assemble, and then they would be ready to fight in the name of the king. Since they weren't the king's guard or necessarily the king's forces, they were referred to as the militia. Now there's a really important point here. A militia can't form without people who have kept weapons and ammunition or fuel to make the weapons work. 4, it wouldn't hurt to have some practice using the weapons. And 5, the weapons need to be equivalent to the weapons of the enemy. However, sometimes the war didn't quite go the way it should have, or the way it was planned to go. And so the peasants would be very angry with the king. Now that they had just recently been instructed by the king to have all of these weapons to fight this war, and then coming back from the war disgruntled, they might want to rise up and fight the king. So then the king would issue another edict. All of a sudden, it is no longer okay for peasants to keep and bear arms. You must get rid of all of your arms. So the peasants would, until the next war, and until after they've forgotten the failure of the previous war. Then the king would do it all over again. Issue an edict, arm up, go to war, get mad, try to rise up to the king, issue an edict, remove the weapons, and so on and such forth. The Founding Fathers, seeing the records of this arming and disarming cycle, organizing into a militia and then disbanding the militia over and over and over through the centuries, is precisely why they wrote the Second Amendment as they did, with the most terrible and awful grammar of all time. They list all of the conditions first, and then they add, shall not be infringed, at the very end. So it's like, all of these things, all of these conditions, they're a basic right, and they shall not be infringed. So, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Maybe pretty writing, maybe awful writing, but conditions and shall not be infringed. In a nutshell, the Second Amendment guarantees against the monopoly on force that the government had. Remember, the king would say, arm up, disarm, arm up, disarm. And the Founding Fathers said, hold on, when do the peasants have a say in this? Can't the peasants go, no, we're armed up, we're going to keep our arms? Or, no, we all want to be disarmed and just be victims. So they enumerated the Second Amendment to codify it and say that the peasants have a voice. The peasants can say, no, we're tired of playing your circle games. We're going to keep and bear arms. In fact, the peasants having these arms is enough to keep the king from continuing the circular logic, especially when it's enumerated in some of the founding documents. The people have a say. By them just having the arms, they are a deterrent to this crazy cycle of arm up and disarm and arm up and disarm. Now, reason 2 is a much older reason than reason 1. Reason 1 is the historical reason, but reason 2 is kind of the natural order of things. It's kind of founded in evolution. Kind of transcends the human species. See, reason 2 is the reason of personal defense, which was upheld by the Supreme Court in 2008 with Heller versus District of Columbia. Link down below. You see, unfortunately, there is a fact of life. Animals are either predators or prey. Now, some part of humanity calls themselves civilized and believe that they have changed this dynamic. It's a nice thought, and I really like it. Unfortunately, if we look at the globe as is in all of the various countries, it's simply not true. Here's a rather obscure example. The Moriori was a tribe that resolved differences peacefully with dialogue. When the Maori attacked, the Moriori decided to live peacefully with the Maori and surrender to them. The Maori then systematically killed them until there was none left in December of 1853. So it's fairly recently. That's out of Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. Another more obvious example, slightly more contemporary. Some very civilized Germans called the Nazis killed millions of people about 80 years ago. Also from Guns, Germs, and Steel. And there are countless many more examples of this. That's the aggressive side of nature. The side that opposes that aggressive side is defense. Now, for the natural world, all other animals, other than humans, only have access to their biological bits. Their teeth, their claws, their horns, their speed, their toughness, their heft, size, weight, things like this. So if an animal is prey, let's call it an antelope in Africa, it has its horns, its hooves, and its speed. And an individual antelope does not stand a chance against a pride of lions. Maybe against a single lion, but not against a pride, because the pride has multiple members and they can encircle that antelope. So the first order of defense is strength in numbers. And the reason strength in numbers is so important is because it decreases the individual's likelihood of being injured or eaten in case of humans being killed. More antelope that are still smaller and don't pack as much of a punch as a gigantic cat don't stand a chance. But if there's more of them, the individual has a higher chance of escaping and getting away. Unless, of course, the antelope somehow figured out how to turn grass into twine and use twine to tie rocks, really sharp rocks, to its hooves and elbows and wherever else to make it a lot more pointy, so that when the lion tried to bite it or swipe at it, instead of being able to grab onto the antelope, it would slice open its paw. Then the antelope would have an advantage. It would have something that would equalize it. The prey would become equal to the predator. Of course, antelope can't do this. They can't make metal or steel, give themselves armor. They can't make trebuchets or bows and arrows or swords. It's ridiculous. But it proves the point of predator versus prey. And no matter how much someone denies there being a predator-prey dynamic, there will always be those individuals in our society who don't care for our classification of civilized and have a need greater than someone else's freedom, dignity, consent, etc. This, at its core, is reason 2. Self-defense. The Second Amendment is there to equalize and empower any individual to be able to defend themselves, because that individual is there for the crime being committed. If the antelope finds itself in a dark alley and the pride of lions turns on it and pushes it into that alley to do all kinds of nefarious things too, the antelope has the option of being a victim, or the antelope has the option of fighting back. The antelope could call for help, but that's only going to work if help is around the corner. If help is not around the corner, the antelope is present in that alleyway at that time. So what would equalize an antelope against a pride of lions? Well, when the pride of lions is a bunch of thugs, then maybe mace or pepper spray. I don't think that a taser would work because it's one shot per person. So you'd either have to carry a lot of tasers, as many as there are lions, but firearm holds lots of rounds. So the Second Amendment is about empowering the weak to defend themselves against the powerful, the oppressive, the predators, with equal force. There's the old quote, God made men, and Sam Colt made them equal. And whether you believe in God or not, I'm sure that you can get the gist of the statement. Link to that down below. What if, instead of a group of thugs, the pride of lions is the government? Overeager ATF agents? Law enforcement officers that could use more training? Maybe they're young, maybe they're ignorant, maybe they're racist. Now, freedom and self-defense should apply to all people equally. Unfortunately, that has not been the case in this country, but we'll get to that a little bit more in episode 24, gun control. To stick with the analogy of the antelope and the lions to prove the very basic point of the natural order of things, reason number 2 for the Second Amendment being self-defense, Robinson Jeffers said, "What but the wolf's tooth whittled so fine the fleet limbs of the antelope." Quite poetic. Now there are some reasons that are misattributed to the Second Amendment. Reason number one is hunting. You see, back when the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, hunting was a natural thing. It was just part of how you fed your family. And so it was kind of viewed like farming. There's no amendment protecting the right to farm. And actually, no one thought that until the 1960s when the NRA pivoted. In fact, hunting could be seen as humans being aggressive toward animals, and as nothing, as the exact opposite of defense. Defense either for the nation or defense for the individual. So the Second Amendment has absolutely nothing to do with hunting, hunting rifles, shotguns, or any other weapon, bows, that might be used for hunting. Not reason number two is sporting use. You see, when the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, things were expensive. Ammunition was expensive. Guns were expensive. Guns used black powder. That's very corrosive. That means every time you fired the gun, you had to spend an inordinate amount of time washing the rifle, taking the whole thing apart and washing it, otherwise it would rust. They didn't have time or energy or money to play games with firearms. There weren't sports leagues, there weren't shooting competitions, there were none of these things until much later as the country gained resources. So the Second Amendment is not there to protect sporting purposes. Sporting purposes are good to help people become better shooters. It would be good for the Second Amendment to protect sporting purposes, but it certainly was not an original intent and a reason, because it has very little to do with self-defense. The third not reason is collecting. I don't even know why I have to say this. Collecting firearms has nothing to do with defending the nation or defending yourself. It has everything to do with people with too much money placing too high a value on otherwise probably worthless objects. No offense to any collectors out there. So one last time, the Second Amendment was written to crowdsource national defense and enumerate the right that individuals have to defend themselves, to equalize and empower the individual against any possible pride of lions. So I just said enumerates the basic right to self-defense. Rights are different from privileges. Rights are things people have, whether other people or governments want them to have those rights or not. A privilege is something given to someone by someone else, more often than not, given to citizens by their government. So, a right is something an individual has, regardless of what anybody else thinks, and a privilege is something someone is given. So the Second Amendment is an enumeration of a basic right, because you can't take the right of someone to defend themselves away. I hope that makes sense. Please go look at that link down below of that report and read the history yourself. And that explained to me what the Second Amendment was all about. Of course, as is often the case, the more you learn about something, the more questions you get, which is exactly what happened to me. Now that I understood why the Second Amendment was written the way that it was, what it meant, kind of what it was moving toward, I had to figure out, well, okay, what's the use case of the Second Amendment? How could this actually apply to me in my daily life? Remember, this is all about satisfying my oath, Bill of Rights, the Citizen's Task, all of that stuff in the Foundation playlist, right? So I'll see you in the next video. Use case.